Now I am going to introduce you to our keynote speaker. Brandon Jones is the Executive Director of the Minnesota Association for Children's Mental Health. He specializes in adverse childhood experiences, historical and intergenerational trauma, and social emotional intelligence. He's got leadership and intercultural inventory experience. He holds a BA in sociology from the University of Minnesota, a master's in community psychology from Metropolitan State, and a master's in psychotherapy from Adler Graduate School. He's also a 2013 Bush Foundation Leadership Fellow. And I love this. His purpose is live life with purpose on purpose. So it doesn't get any better than that. Thank you, Brandon, for joining us. Looking forward to what you have to share with us today.
Absolutely. Thank you for the introduction, and thank you all for being here this morning. I'm looking forward to kicking off day 2. So at this point, I'm going to share my slides so we can get started. I'm going to encourage you all, if you have questions throughout, to put them in the Q&A area so we can grab those, and I will answer those questions at the end of today's presentation. So please, please, please don't forget your questions. Put them in the chat so we can grab those at the end. All right. Get this set up here. So hopefully this is coming through clear for everybody. So today's conversation is entitled Rethinking Trauma-Informed Care to Support Sustainable Wellness. And this is important because many of you are coming to the end of the school year. If you haven't already concluded the school year, you're gearing up for summer. Some of us are depleted. Some of us are exhausted. Some of us are looking forward to the summer so we can kind of have a restart. And it's important to think about this as you're going through that phase and as you're gearing up for the fall as well, is how do you want to enter that next school year? How do you want to enter this next season? How do you want to make sure that you're sustainable? Because so often what ends up happening is we get into these grooves and these kind of patterns and habits, and we get energized, and then we just deplete all our energy and our resources. And by the time the Thanksgiving holiday shows up, we're halfway burnt out, if not already burnt out. So what I really want to encourage you all to think about this now, so you're developing your well-being skill sets as we go. And I want to do this from a trauma-informed lens, because one of the things that often happens when we talk about trauma-informed care is we focus on the young people, we focus on the students, their parents and caregivers, we focus in on the community. We don't always focus in on ourselves, but in order for trauma-informed care services to really work, to truly work for us, we have to look at the folks who do the work. Because if we're not whole, if we're not healthy, that work is halfway done. That productivity is not to the fullest capacity. So we have to make sure we're taking care of ourselves. And I want to make sure that before the end of my talk today, that you have a nice, solid understanding of what sustainable wellness is, and post-traumatic growth, which I'll talk about in before we conclude. But also, I want us to reshift the way that we think about self-care. Because self-care is a very interesting term. Some people, when they hear of self-care, they almost feel like they've been traumatized by self-care. For other people, they're like, yes, I love self-care. They think of all the things they do. But one of the things, and I'm going to talk about this later, but one of the things that has happened is we've been introduced to self-care in a particular manner. And I want to really dissect that a little bit today and have you all shift your mindsets so that no matter if you're doing things this summer or you're getting geared up for the fall, that you're prepared, you're ready to go, so you make it all the way through the school year with being able to go over those hurdles and be able to sustain those bumps in the road as we go, because they will happen. That's our jobs. We know that our jobs aren't easy, but they're pivotal and very vital. So I'm gonna dive right into that as we go. As you heard from my bio, I am the executive director of Minnesota Association for Children's Mental Health. I know that is a mouthful. We go by MACMA for short. And yeah, what we do at our organization is we do kind of a three-pronged approach. We work directly with youth through arts and helping them identify how they see mental health show up in their lives. So we do that through theater arts. We have a theater arts program, and then we also do that through digital media as well. Then secondary, we work with parents and caregivers who have children with mental health diagnosis, and we just assist in all different types of ways. So when people call us, they need help, whether that's connecting to therapeutic services, maybe they just have questions, or they're looking for resources, or they're trying to develop skill sets, we just step in and assist. We'll even go to IEP meetings with some parents as long as we have the capacity to do so. But most people know us for our third prong, which is our professional development. So we do all types of trainings throughout the year. And we have two pretty big conferences every year. One in the spring, which is known as our spring conference, that typically is in Duluth, but during the pandemic, it's been virtual. And then one in right at the end of right at the beginning of winter is probably the best way to say it. But we know here in Minnesota, winter can start as early as October. But we have our conference in November as our infant and early childhood mental health conference. So that's a little bit about who we are and what we do. Myself, my background, I do teach grad school. I do teach psychology students and students who are becoming clinicians themselves at Metro State University. I do a little bit of consulting when I have time. And then I used to be a therapist. I used to actually be a mental health therapist before I transitioned into management. You heard about my educational background. Another notable thing about myself is I'm a 2013 Bush Foundation Leadership Fellow, which some of that work that I did during that time, you're gonna actually get exposed to today. So, oh, I didn't mean to skip that one. So let's stay here. So what's my goal today? So before the end of my keynote, one of the things that I want to do is I want to quote unquote disrupt your current thought processes, not in a malicious way, but I want to get you to think. I want you to be critical thinkers when it comes to trauma informed care and when it comes to taking care of yourself in doing this work. I want to expand your worldview and expand your lenses. And I know you've been asked to do that in so many different ways over the last, I would say, 5 years or so, whether we're talking about social justice, adjusting to a pandemic, understanding different learning styles, switching from in-person learning to remote learning to hybrid learning. Your lenses have been expanded in all different types of ways. But today, I want you to think about how to expand your lens to take the best care of yourself. So no matter what type of adjustments show up in the work that you do, you're able to do that and keep on moving, keep on trucking along so it doesn't become as difficult. Because we know there's a lot of people in this space, educators, who are no longer doing this work. You know, right now on TikTok, one of the most popular TikTok trends are educators who are talking about leaving the work, why they left, well, they couldn't stand it anymore. And that's important. We should pay attention to that. It's entertaining for some of us, it's educational for others, but we really should be looking at that. And why is that a genre? Why is that a trend? And what's happening? Why are so many educators leaving the field? Because we know that educators are important for our society. So we should be investing back into making sure that these folks have what they need so they can keep doing the pivotal work that they need to do for all of society. So really what I'm doing today is adding some context to help build on the things that you do already and some of the things that you might not necessarily do and some of the things that we know we should do that we don't always do. And I'm guilty of that myself too. No one's perfect, but we're all trying. So in order to do that, first you have to define what is a worldview. I talk a lot about worldviews. I think this is one of the things that gets overlooked when we talk about our own well-being. Is how do we see the world around us? The way that we see the world around us, it really dictates a lot of our actions. It dictates a lot of our emotions. It dictates even a lot of our thoughts. And we don't always think of this because we don't slow down, especially in our culture, in our American Western culture. We're very go, go, go. You know, it's like we start our day like at the start mark, and then we finish our day at the finish line. And in between, we hit all these little checkpoints to keep us going. We don't really slow ourselves down and analyze what is happening, but we have to. And I think, you know, again, there's no better example than the pandemic that really forced people to slow down and say, whoa, what is going on here? We got to take better care of ourselves and really think about what's happening. So in order to do that, we must understand our own worldviews. So what is a worldview? A worldview is a particular philosophy of life or conception of the world. We all have worldviews. You know, the things that you've experienced as a child, as a young, adult, and as a more mature adult, we'll say a seasoned adult, all those things go into how you see the world around you. So we all have worldviews. And believe it or not, we bring those worldviews into the work. Those worldviews are in display no matter what we teach, how we teach, etc. Your worldview is going to be on display. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. A lot of times people feel like that's a bad thing, that you shouldn't inject who you are into what happens. As long as you have proper boundaries and you are authentic and you're not, using it in any harmful way to other people, it's good to just be your authentic self. And I think that's one of the reasons why a lot of us do get depleted in our work is we're not being authentic. We're not being who we truly are because of all these other external forces that are telling us, hey, don't do that, don't be this, don't express yourself this way. And it starts to weigh on us internally, and we start to get quote unquote burnt out, which we'll talk more about that as we go. Let's stick with worldview for a second. And if you've been to a training of mine before, you've probably seen this graphic and heard me talk about this. It's very important to understanding how we move forward. So our worldview, again, is a conception of the world around us, our conception of the world. How is this developed? Well, think about it as like a math equation. Let's just say it's addition. So we have our influences. Our influences are typically, our primary influences are our biological parents. If you did not grow up with your biological parents, it's whoever those parents were for you or caregivers were for you are usually your primary influences. So right away, those folks that you bond with very early on in your life are your primary influences. Right outside of that would be siblings if you have them, or close friends or close family members, people that you see on a very consistent or frequent basis. Then if you expand outside of that, you can think of folks like daycare providers, educators. You all are huge influencers in people's lives. Sometimes you can even throw in neighbors in this category, or really close family friends. Those are kind of the second ring category of influence. Then outside of that, you have folks like coaches, group leaders, spirituality or religious leaders, folks that you see on a frequent enough basis, but they're not as close as like quote unquote family are. And then outside of that, you have things like media, which we can. I think we're getting closer where media is starting to bring itself a little closer into more of a primary influence, as we have young people who have social media accounts and things of that nature, cell phones and things of that nature, where media is a huge influencer, especially because it's 24/7 and it's 365 and it's at your fingertips or at your voice any point in time that you want it or need it. Media is a huge influencer on who we are. So our influences are huge to determining what our worldview is. And when I say media, I'm not just talking about social media. I'm talking about books, movies, podcasts, articles and newspapers. We can definitely talk about various different devices and apps. We get influenced by so many different things, radio, etc. And then you add your influences with your experiences. And our experiences are the situations we find ourselves in and the places and locations that we visit, the actual environments that we are in. So those experiences plus our influences equate to what our worldview is. And our worldview can change over time. As we get older, we can learn things. We can have experiences that literally shift and shape our lives for the good or for bad. And that shapes our worldview. So if you look at this circle diagram here on your left, we have our worldview in the center. And then right outside of our worldview are our values. So our worldview actually shapes our values shape our worldview. These are all things that play within one another. And then right outside of that are our behaviors, how we act, how we function, the things that we do. And then right outside of that is culture, which is something that we really, really, really have to increase. And I know, for the I think it was the Spring Institute or Winter Institute, we talked about cultural intelligence and things of that nature. And it's so important that we really start paying attention to culture. I know when we say culture in the United States, in our society, most people go straight to race. You say culture, race, and sometimes ethnicity, but really we go straight to race because we're so race focused, which is, it's something that we have to work on. I don't say it's a bad thing, but we have to be able to shake beyond that, because one thing that is end up happening right now is our society is getting closer and closer and closer together, and culture is starting to blend in with one another. And it's not just about racial dynamics, it's about cultural dynamics. I think a lot of us are missing that. But our cultures, and if you believe you don't have a culture, boy, you better go look around and pay attention. We have several different cultures that we intersect with every day. You're participating in the culture right now. I am a speaker. You are listening to me speak. So technically, I am like a teacher right now. You are like a student. That is a cultural phenomenon that's going on. You are in a learning culture at this moment. I am in a presenting or a instructing culture at the moment. And this is how we're doing it. And it's done virtually, done in person, etc. We interplay and intersect with cultures all the time. So if you think about culture, you think about worldview and the connection between those two, you think about trauma-informed care, that brings in an idea of culture as well. How should your organization show up so that you are attending to the needs of the people who are receiving your service? And then also For yourself, how are you in the position to be able to offer that educational opportunity, those learning opportunities, or that support opportunity? That's a cultural group. And then we have to be able to understand that as we go, because sometimes we are in cultural groups that don't really fit our worldviews or who we are. And then that starts to chip away at our well-being. And you'll see that on display as we go. But this is an important piece to this understanding this, is that sometimes our worldviews are in combat with some of the culture dynamics that we're in, and it starts to chip away at our well-being. And that's what leads to a lot of our burnout. And think about some of the workplace environments you may have been in, or groups you may have been a part of, or teams you may have been on that weren't really good fits for you. Maybe the people weren't really nice. Maybe you just didn't like it. I mean, it could be a lot of different things. How did that make you feel? And how did that impact your energy, et cetera? These are the things that we have to think about for our well-being. Now, talking about culture and culture changes, boy, COVID-19, which we're still not done with. I know many of us feel like we are past the pandemic, but we're not quite out of this thing just yet. Things are looking a little better, but we're not quite out of this thing just yet. And what the pandemic did was it brought on two big things that I'm going to talk about. One is a new form of stress for many of us. Prior to February 2020 here in the United States, unless you had a chronic illness or some type of disability, or you took care or you were in close proximity with someone who had one of those three conditions, we didn't really think of health the way that we do now. Health wasn't one of those things that was on our mind. It didn't stress us out. We didn't think about other people's health and how it affected us either. Not really. I mean, we really did not really consider, okay, if this person is 6 feet away from me, they can potentially harm me, even if they cough. We would just say, excuse me, they sneeze or anything like that. But the pandemic brought a whole new level of just awareness for us when it came to our health and the people around us health as well. And that added a new stressor. So what came with that? Well, how did that happen? First of all, we got new language. That's how culture changes and shifts. We got new language. And here are just some terms. I know there's way more that definitely can be added here. But this is something that we heard right away. We heard about remote working, distant learning, social distancing, sheltering in place, pandemics, which is something that became more common in our lexicon, personal protection equipment or PPE, variants, vaccines, booster shots, like all these words and all these terms led to what? A lot of emotions. It led to us feeling a type of way. It led to us responding to people a different way. It led to people not actually associating themselves with family members, friends, and coworkers due to them not participating in some of these things, not necessarily being more outright with where they're at with particular statuses, et cetera. It divided a lot of people, and that impacted a lot of our emotions. So when it comes to terms, when it comes to words, I don't want to underestimate the power that these things have, because as we got introduced to these words, they started to become a part of our culture, started to become a part of our value system, started to become a part of our actions, and ultimately it became a part of our worldview. So what does that do to us as a whole? What does that do to our well-being? Well, if people aren't social distancing, if you did not say that you got vaccinated and you didn't get your booster shots, some people didn't want to talk to you anymore. They didn't want to be around you. They didn't want to deal with you at all. I mean, this literally has shifted and shaped our world to a different space and place. Another thing, so we had stress is one thing that the pandemic brought for all of us and our well-being. To talk about being trauma-informed, the next thing that happened was we all entered into this weird kind of space of grief. We all kind of had some grief during this time show up for us. Now, typically, when people think of grief, they think of when someone passes away, when someone dies. And that is a part of grief, but that is not, that grief, when people pass away, that is a major part of grief. Let me say it that way. But that is not the only type of grief that we have. There are other things that we lose that end up leading to us in a grieving state. And grief is really about significant loss. So here are just some of the things that were pretty common that I heard from other folks that people lost during the pandemic. A lot of people lost access to things. A lot of people lost their normal routine. A lot of people lost their ability to choose or choice. A lot of people lost connection. Right? They lost just connections with various different people. A lot of people lost opportunities. And yes, people did lose loved ones during this period. And this ambiguous loss was significant because I think that it was happening to so many of us at the same time that many of us did not realize how much grief we were actually responding to. We just kind of adjusted to what was happening because we had those terms, right? We had those things. We had our orders of what we should do and how we should behave, and we didn't really process the grief that was going on. Some of us felt it though, right? We didn't necessarily process the grief, but a lot of us felt it. And then when I would talk to professionals, when I would do trainings, we would do the exercise. I would ask you a question and I would have people put things in the chat. And they would say things like, I feel stretched. I feel like I'm on a roller coaster. I'm exhausted. I'm depleted. They would have all these terms that were really explaining how the grief of the pandemic was showing up, how the stress of the pandemic was showing up in their lives. So again, grief is a normal and natural state. It happens to all of us as a part of the human experience. So it's the natural emotional response resulting in a significant loss. And this is what grief is. And that's what happened during the pandemic. We all had something taken away from us. And really that first one, that normal routine, and that second one, the normal routine was a huge thing that many people lost. We had to shift and mode and readjust. Our kids had to readjust. We had to readjust. Our parents had to readjust. Like everyone adjusted to what was happening in the world. And we're still adjusting. And we may not go back to how things were. It may be a permanent adjustment. And some people are not ready for that. Some people don't feel comfortable with that. Some people just want it to just go back. But we may never go back. It may have been so catastrophic that we are on a new path as we go, which may not be a bad thing. Again, we are very resilient people. I think we'll be able to move forward without too much harm, but do know that something did happen. So let's talk about the normal process of grief. So there is typically when grief happens, there is a normal process of grief, but then there's something that we have called complicated grief, which I'll explain in a minute. So let's go through the normal process of grief. If you look at here at this chart, the green arrow highlights the normal process of grief. It starts with acute grief and then it ends with what we call integrated grief. So acute grief, immediately after the loss and for months afterwards, it's normal to have intense symptoms of shock, distress, sadness, poor appetite, sleep trouble, or poor concentration. These symptoms will slowly diminish with the passage of time. So think about yourself during this pandemic time. How many of you had some of those things show up, or you know people who had some of those things showed up? You had some distress, some sadness. You had poor appetite, which could be you didn't eat much or you ate way too much, right? Your appetite wasn't balanced. You might have had some sleep troubles. You weren't able to go to sleep or you were just oversleeping, right? Poor concentration. Like think about some of the symptoms of this acute grief. This is what happens when that immediate loss happens in our lives. So the normal process is it goes from acute grief all the way down to integrated grief. Integrated grief is after resolving the most intense symptoms of acute or complicated grief, which we'll get to in a second. You will enter into a lifelong stage of integrated grief, which is meaning you're learning how to work through the grief as your life goes on. At this point, you have come to accept the reality of the loss and you have made resume daily life activities. This does not mean that you will not miss your loved one if someone passed, or you won't miss the thing that you lost any less, or that you don't feel the pain of the memory. You've just learned to cope with the grief. Acute grief may show itself again, especially around holidays, anniversaries, and reminders. So things show up. It may pop back up. You might not have the same response to the grief that you initially had, but you will have a response when reminders come and things activate you to remember the thing that you actually end up losing. But then there's something that happens in the middle. This is where things get complicated, and I'd be willing to bet many people, a significant percentage of people, are probably in this middle area. This is what we call complicated grief. So sometimes the symptoms of acute grief never seem to go away. They can last for years. The loss of a loved one continues to feel unreal or unmanageable. So this is in the context of death, but this can be in the context of any type of significant loss. So you might consistently yearn for the deceased or experience guilt about the idea of moving on or accepting the loss. Many of us are in this complicated grief space because the pandemic is not quite over. And there have been significant changes in our lives. And since the pandemic isn't done and those changes have happened and are continuing to happen for so many, that complicated grief state is where we are. And we're kind of in this rut. And we're in the middle of, we're beyond year 2 of the pandemic, and we're continuing to move on, and we're still adjusting, and we're still feeling the ripple effects of what has happened. I know in my family, I have an infant at home, and the formula shortage definitely hit my house, where we were scrambling to find formula. It was very, very stressful the last month or so, trying to figure out how we're going to feed our child, because breastfeeding was not an option anymore because of complications. So very, very interesting times. Talk about significant loss, disruption, and how we normally would do things. Expectations are at a minimum because of the things that happen. That level of grief can show up in so many different ways for so many different people. All right, let's keep moving. So for some of us that may have been able to escape a little bit of the grief, and it hasn't had that much of an impact, but the stress has still been there. There was a term introduced to us in April of 2021, last year. And this term was introduced to us by a New York Times article that went viral, and it was talking about languishing. And languishing is a sense of stagnation and emptiness. It feels as if you're muddling through your days, looking at your life through a foggy windshield, and it might be the most dominant emotion of 2021. And it's interesting because when I seen this term, I was like, yes, that is it. That's exactly what people are dealing with, is this languishing thing. It's like, oh my God, I've been looking for a label to kind of identify this thing, but boom, they finally figured it out. It was languishing. And I thought about this definition a couple of times, and I said, you know what? Even prior to the pandemic, I know a lot of people who were languishing. Like, the pandemic may have opened it up for a lot of folks. There's a lot of folks who were languishing, that stagnation, that emptiness, muddling through your days like you're looking through a foggy windshield. And I think, and when I was able to process through this a little bit more, I was like, wow, this is what happened. This is like the stage before people get to burnout. It's like they're just kind of muddling through. They're just kind of, going along, and then finally that next straw gets pulled from the barrel, and boom, everything gets crashing down. Becomes a huge struggle. So we have to pay particular attention to this languishing feeling, because it's not just a pandemic-based feeling. This is something that many of us can be an identifier to let us know when we're getting a little too close to burning out. All right, let's talk about stress and distress. So stress is both experience shared by others, but also the perception experience within the body and mind, or our subjective reality. So again, we have stress, and then we have distress. Distress is described as a person's internal state of dysregulation and often disorganization. This is so you may ask yourself a question like, what is happening to me right now, and is this dangerous? So we have distress and we have stress that shows up. Now, stress can be looked at from in three different ways. And I love talking about stress this way because it helps to identify where people are at and how much stress people are actually under. Now, the three levels are positive stress, tolerable stress, and toxic stress. Now, positive stress is something we all have. Everybody has positive stress. Positive stress is like when you forget to plug up your phone or charge your phone before you go to sleep, and you wake up and it's almost dead. You may spill some coffee in your shirt when you're on your way to work. Somebody may cut you off while you're driving, and you may have a little bit of road rage. You may say some words that you would normally not say in front of other people towards that person who cut you off in the middle of the road. That's positive stress, right? What ends up happening is your cortisol level rises because of whatever incident takes place. But then over time, it comes on down. You're able to calm down and move forward with your life. So this happens. Then we have tolerable stress. Most people will experience a tolerable stress experience in their lifetime. Tolerable stress is a lot more significant than positive stress. This is like when someone passes away in your family. Does not feel good. Cortisol is your main stress hormone. It's not the only one, but it's your dominant stress hormone in the body. So when you're stressed out, your body starts to release cortisol. So what ends up happening, let's say grandma passes away, unfortunately, right? Grandma's in old age. She just passed on. She was 95 years old. Grandma passed away. You're stressed out. You miss grandma. You're sad. You're going through your grief process. Over time, cortisol levels come on down. You're able to kind of keep moving. But then what ends up happening? Well, it's an anniversary, grandma's birthday, the holiday season comes, cortisol levels rise back up, but not to where it was originally. but it rises back up because you're thinking about grandma, you're missing her. And what ends up happening is, your stress levels come up, but then they go on down as you're able to move through those days and move through those time periods. That's tolerable stress. It's manageable. You're able to get through it. It doesn't feel good when it happens. Then we have toxic stress. Toxic stress is when that cortisol level peaks up, boom, and then it just kind of maintains at that high level. And unfortunately, toxic stress is that strong, frequently, and prolonged adversity. And unfortunately, what ends up happening is, and you all see this in the work that you do, a lot of the students that you engage with, even some of the parents and caregivers that you engage with, sometimes even some of your coworkers, if we're going to be honest, are at that toxic stress level state. And it's unfortunate, right? Because that's really not the area that you want to introduce services to, but so many people come to us in that toxic stress state. Cortisol levels are high, they maintain high. Now, here it's important to ask the question, why do those cortisol levels stay up there? And the reason for that is because many people are in this toxic stress state. They're in toxic stress environments. So there's environmental things that are supporting that high level of cortisol, that high level of stress. They don't get a break from, right? Sometimes those toxic stress areas can be schools. Sometimes they're neighborhoods that people come from. Sometimes they're the home or the friend groups that people are around. It can be a lot of different things that are leading to the toxic stress. What are some examples of toxic stress? Being homeless and highly mobile, being bullied, being in a sex trafficking situation, that's a little bit more severe, being a domestic violent home. There's a lot of different things that can lead to that toxic stress level being very high. Being in a community where there's a lot of gun violence. Those are all toxic stressors. I meant to take this one out, but get a bonus slide. All right, so stress can come in a couple of different ways. We have internal stress and external stress. So the internal stressors arise from within the individual. External stressors arise from external events and demands on you. So like COVID-19 was an external stressor. And guess what? It demanded a lot from individuals. Like we all had demands put on us, whether we liked it or not. There were things that we had to step up and do in order for us to get through the pandemic and to continue to get through the pandemic. And what happens, whether they're internal or external stressors, what happens is the effects on those stressors can have physical effects, psychological effects, behavioral effects, and cognitive effects. Now, oftentimes people ask me here, Brandon, what's the difference between psychological and cognitive effects? Aren't those the same thing? They're intertwined, but they're not the same. Your psychological effects look at more of your mood and your feelings, right? Your mood and your feelings. Your cognitive effects affects more of your thinking, your ability to think. Now, again, those things are, they're usually intertwined, but they are different. And stress can impact all four of those. It can impact some versus others. Like I know people who gain a lot of weight when they're stressed out. I know people who lose weight when they're stressed out. It doesn't affect their thinking per se. Their mood, their actual mood may be affected, but their physical body starts to respond to the stress that they're under. So your stress levels can have various different effects, and it really depends on the person. Sometimes it depends on the coping skills you have as well. Trauma. So one of the things we want to talk about was trauma-informed care. We got to define what trauma is. So I teach grad school. I use a lot of big fancy definitions for trauma and fancy textbooks that cost students a lot of money. But the easiest definition to understand trauma, when you're working with kids of all different ages, when you're able to explain to them in this manner, trauma is a deep emotional wound. People understand that when things hurt them, they're able to understand that that is what trauma is for them. And unfortunately, for some people and in some communities, they have so many deep emotional wounds and things that happen that those things don't become traumatic for them anymore. They become normalized. It's a whole nother training, a whole nother topic, but it's important for us to understand because in school systems, when we're working and engaging in school systems, there are some things that may be deep emotional wounds for us, but since we've been going through them for year after year after year, they become normalized. You just kind of accept it for what it is, even knowing it sucks. You don't like it. We just accept it, and it may have a traumatic effect for you or someone who may be in a similar position as yourself. And remember, trauma is closely connected to toxic stress and toxic stress environments. And again, I said this earlier and I meant it. Sometimes those toxic stress environments can be school buildings. I've worked in school buildings where everybody was traumatized. And it was very interesting to see how the educators were traumatized, and then how the other school support staff were traumatized, administration was traumatized. It was like this triangular battle going on in the school. And I'm just a school-based therapist sitting in the middle of this with the students like, what the heck is going on here? So it's a very interesting thing. So what is trauma-informed care? Trauma-informed care is a strength-based service delivery approach that is grounded in understanding of responsiveness to the impact of trauma and emphasizes physical, psychological, emotional safety, both of the providers and survivors, and it creates opportunities for survivors to rebuild a sense of control and empowerment. I love this definition of trauma-informed care because it does not lead out the providers, you all. Now, you may have different position titles, but at the end of the day, you are providing, you're providing a service to people. And this provider service, you have to be included in what trauma-informed care is all about. You should not be left out. And I think what's happened over the years is that the folks who do the work have been left out. The pandemic has brought you back in, unfortunately, but you should have been brought in way before the pandemic happened, because if you're not healthy doing this work, it's not going to go very well. I'm not going to read all of this here, but I am going to focus in on this chart just so you know the elements of what trauma-informed care, the principles of trauma-informed care, what trauma-informed care should have. So that starts off with safety. People should feel safe within their environments. Then we have trustworthiness and transparency. So we have that relationship that's starting to be built within trauma-informed care. Then you have peer support. The collaboration portion is starting to be built. Once that relationship is starting to develop, how do you have peer support? How do people show up for one another? And then we have collaboration and neutrality. Now that we are showing up for one another, how do we work on particular things within our work to make sure that that collaboration and neutrality is happening? So we're showing up and we're doing things to make sure that we're functioning as a unit. Then we have empowerment, voice, and choice. So is everyone's voice being heard? You know, are we just listening to the customer? Are we even listening to our quote unquote customer, client, students at all? Are we listening to the parents? Are the educators and support staff even being heard? You know, who's talking? Who has the power? And then who needs to also step up and step in? And then we have culture, historical, and gender issues. So where is our areas? Where are our gaps? Where do we need to be more inclusive? Where do we need to have more belonging? Where do we need to be more equitable? What are we missing? So those are the 6 principles of trauma-informed care. And within those 6 principles, we have this piece that is very foundational when it comes to trauma-informed care. Adapting a trauma-informed care approach is not accomplished through any single technique or checklist. It requires consistent attention, caring awareness, sensitivity, and possibly a culture change at the organizational level. So if you're doing trauma-informed care practices and you're saying you're a trauma-informed care school, program, organization, etc., you must make sure that you are ever growing. Like, this is not we reached a status, we got a certificate, or we got sanctioned by a group to be trauma-informed care. This is something that you have to keep working at, right? You have to keep paying attention. You have to be sensitive to what's happening, because the cultural changes are happening all the time. And in this world where change happens so rapidly, culture shifts, pretty much shifts pretty quickly. I would say every 2 years or so, we're having some new cultural piece kind of shift in who we are and how we do things. You have to be up to date in what's happening. Otherwise, you can be causing more harm than good if you're not paying attention to those things. There we go. And how does trauma make an impact? Well, individuals who survive trauma vary widely in how they experience and express the trauma, the traumatic stress reactions. Traumatic stress reactions vary in severity. They are often measured by the level of impairment or distress that young people report, and are determined by the multiple factors that characterize the trauma itself. So the individual's history, the characteristics, the developmental factors, the social cultural attributes, and then also the available resources. So what I'm saying here is there are a lot of different elements that impact how trauma shows up. If people don't have good resources, if they haven't developed those skills, and maybe they don't have the cultural resiliency pieces that they need, or attributes that they need to combat the current context of what they're dealing with. Maybe they don't have the developmental factors. Maybe they're developmentally delayed and they're not able to pick up on certain social cues, and that's feeding into the traumatic experience that they're having. That's what ends up happening is those things are all kind of buffers and barriers to a lot of the trauma. But if those things aren't intact, people end up, needing some support and some help. How does trauma impact the individual's worldview? Well, the characteristics of the trauma and the subsequent traumatic stress reactions can dramatically influence how individuals respond to the environment, relationships, interventions, and treatment services of those same characteristics, and also can shape the assumptions that the individual makes about these three things: their world, so their views of others, their sense of safety, their future, feelings of hopelessness, fear of foresight future, and themselves. So feeling of resilience, feeling they may feel like they are incompetent in regulating their own emotions, etc. So this is important, not just thinking from the student standpoint, but also from your standpoint as well, is when you are experiencing trauma, these things are impacted by you as well. So your views of others, right? You may start to think of, let's say in the school setting, you may start to think, this school is not really good for students. They're not really helping anybody, get to where they need academically or behaviorally. And you may think this is not a safe place to be. You might start thinking about your future. I might not want to do this work much longer. This may be not good for me. I may need to, shift careers, go work at Target. I may need to be doing something else. And then you start thinking about yourself. Well, maybe I'm not good. Maybe I just wasn't built out for this. I wasted all my money going to grad school to get this advanced degree. I'm just wasting my time here. Maybe I should move to a different state. We just start to think all these different things based on just the response that we have that may be a trauma response to what's going on. So how are we adjusting? Well, there's a couple of different ways and things that end up happening. Well, there's three main adjustments that we have that happen when we are in these spaces of extreme stress. One is a secondary traumatic stress, which is characterized by the presence of PTSD that has caused at least one indirect exposure to traumatic material. So young people and even coworkers and even sometimes folks that are just in your, maybe parents or caregivers that are within your field, they would disclose to you some information that is traumatic. You have to decide, what do I do with this information? How do I respond to this? And you don't want that to become your issue or your problem, which we'll talk more about secondary traumatic stress in a second. Then secondly, we have compassion fatigue, which is described as the cost of caring for others in emotional and physical pain, characterized by the pronounced change in the helper's ability to feel empathy for clients or patients or students, loved ones, and coworkers. And then lastly, we have burnout by the emotional exhaustion, depersonalization, and a reduced feeling of personal accomplishment. Hopefully, many of you haven't experienced burnout before. I have experienced it. It sucks. It is not a good thing. It really does tear away at who you are as an individual and as a professional. It is a scary place to be. So hopefully you never experience that. So secondary traumatic stress. So secondary traumatic stress is that emotional distress that results in an individual hearing or sharing elements of firsthand trauma experiences of another. These are some of the symptoms of the secondary traumatic stress. You may notice that you may have some hypervigilance. You may be re-experiencing your own traumatic experiences that you've had. You may have some hopelessness, some guilt, some avoidance, some fear. You may have an insensitivity to violence. You've heard it so much, it's like it is what it is. It may even lead to some sleeplessness. These are all characteristics that you may pick up when you have secondary traumatic stress showing up in the work that you're doing. Next is compassion fatigue. And in compassion fatigue, I love this Peanuts cartoon because it really does highlight who we are and how we do the work that we do when we find ourselves in the space of compassion fatigue. So here in the Peanuts cartoon, you see Snoopy hops off the house and he's going to check in on Charlie Brown. So Snoopy goes to Charlie's house, kicks on the door, bam, bam. Charlie wakes up. Charlie goes outside, see what's going on with his buddy Snoopy. Then so Charlie sees Snoopy and says, "Are you upset, little friend? Have you been lying awake worried? Well, don't you worry, I am here. And I am here to give you reassurance. Everything is going to be all right, Snoopy. The floodwaters will recede, the famine will end, and the sun will shine tomorrow. And I will always be here to take care of you, Snoopy. Be reassured." As Charlie Brown sends Snoopy, loves up on Snoopy, sends Snoopy back home feeling all good. And then Charlie goes and gets back into bed and says, who reassures the reassurer? And this is us. We are the reassurers. We are Charlie Brown in this narrative. Because what do? We love up on the young people. Sometimes we love up on our coworkers and our friends. We reassure them. We pour from that empty cup. We pour into other people. And then we need to figure out who recharges us. And a lot of times, that recharge for us is us. We don't want to think of it like that, but a lot of times it is us. We are our own rechargers. Hopefully, we found things around us to recharge. A lot of times, it's us. But who reassures the reassurer? That's a question for you to think about for yourself as we get into the well-being piece of today. So, compassion fatigue. It's highlighted by a few characteristics: emotional exhaustion, mental exhaustion, physical exhaustion, a lot of exhaustion, depersonalization, a decrease in sense of efficacy, and then you may even have connected to acts of hearing or empathizing with traumatic stories. So you may be finding this connection where you're connecting to all these traumatic things that are going on. This is when you can get into those YouTube rabbit holes about all the murder mysteries and things that are going on in the world around us. And then there's that good old friend, burnout. Burnout. Like I said earlier, I've been in burnout. One of the reasons why I switched to management out of doing actual therapy because I got burnt out. I just really got burnt out. And it was really hard for me to admit it and to accept it and to figure out something else. And it took me months, literally like 5 months to figure out, like, I have to stop doing this. I'm going to hate therapy. Like that literally was my ultimatum. It was like, keep going and hate it or find something else to do. And it was tearing away at me because I didn't want to do anything. All I wanted to do, the only thing that brought me joy was hanging out with my daughters. That was it. Everything else, my wife was annoying, work was annoying. I hated everything. And it was just a rough time. But it was all stemmed from me just pouring from an empty cup, giving in, and working with young people who I was doing beautiful therapeutic work with them, but not necessarily with their parents, not with the school they were going to. So it was like starting over with these young kids over and over and over again, because we would do great work for 2 or 3 weeks. They will have their skills and their coping skills and their tools. I would send them back out to the world. They would come back a week or two later, and it was like an empty slate. It was like starting all over again. And it just kept happening over and over and over, led to burnout. So I was there. I had the difficulty sleeping, especially on Sunday nights. So I watch an extra episode of Curb the Enthusiasm or whatever HBO show was popular at the time. The avoidance of work urge, difficulty concentrating and finishing tasks, feeling overwhelmed with the workload. I was withdrawing from colleagues. I had general irritation towards everything. That was me. I was here. I've been burnt out. I've seen it. It is an ugly place to be. And I hope none of you ever experienced that. But I had to get on my healing journey. And this is what today's big focus is on, that sustainable wellness. So when we talk about healing isn't just for people who've experienced trauma. The trauma-informed care is about a healing practice. It's about setting up an environment where healing can take place. That's what trauma-informed care is really, really about. Making sure that people can get what they need and no harm is being done. So how do we do? Well, what is healing first? Let's start with what is healing. So healing is, and this is my definition, feel free to borrow it. Healing is a consistent process of efforts to create peace, balance, and justice. A consistent process of efforts to create peace, balance, and justice. In your world, this is what you're doing. When you engage with a young person, their parents, their caregivers, you're helping them find peace in their lives, you're helping them develop some balance, and you're helping them feel like they have their just due, that they're being treated correctly, that their voice is being heard, that they're not being manipulated. And this is important. You might not see your role as this, but believe it or not, this is definitely the role that you're in. Why do we need healing? Well, life is hard. We all face challenges, and there is no guarantee that things will be okay. That's why we need healing. There's no guarantee that things will be okay. The pandemic has highlighted that for us, that, hey, at any given time, something, an illness, a virus, can show up in our world and flip it upside down and make us think about how we do things a lot differently. That doesn't mean that we can't be resilient, but that's why healing is important. We have some standards and some practices in place so we can withstand the things that do show up in our lives. But what about a work-life balance in this new virtual world? One thing that the pandemic has done is it has really challenged our thoughts and me as an executive director, this is really something I think about a lot. It's really challenged us in figuring out what does work look like. Now, for some of us who are in work situations where we can't, we don't get we don't, it doesn't shift as much. So, for example, if you work in a hospital, you work in a hospital. Your work-life balance looks a lot different than an educator who works in a school building. But for other folks who work in cushy offices and things like that, we have to figure out this work-life balance thing. We have a lot of industries that figured out that people can work from home and it's a lot cheaper for them. And guess what? A lot of jobs are going to start from home. They're going to give you an extra $50 so you can pay for the internet. They're gonna mail you a computer and an ID and all this other stuff. And the next thing you know, you're doing your job from from your living room, and that's okay, or your office space. And that's good. We really have to rethink this work-life balance thing. And what does this mean for us? Which means for our well-being, what does it look like for us to work and also take care of our families? What does that blend look like? If you're an educator or someone who works in school buildings, you're taking care of other people's children, but you may be a parent yourself. What does that work-life balance look like? So work-life balance is something that already was something that we questioned pre-pandemic, but now it looks way different today. And we have to figure out what does that look like and how does it support our well-being? So with that well-being, we're gonna look at the wellness domains. This comes from the University of Minnesota Spirituality and Healing Center. I love how they broke this out because it really gives you some focus on what well-being can look like for you and some areas that you can actually think about in your life and to work on. So these 6 areas are health, relationships, security, purpose, community, and environment. These are 6 areas that you can really you can literally use this as a framework to just get better every day, just get more and more healthy as you go. So let's talk, this slide didn't work out. There we go. I don't know what happened there. Sorry about that. So let's talk about this well-being wheel and some of these areas and just a few things that I pointed out that you can work on. So let's talk about the first one, environment. Everyone should have a personal space. It can be your bathroom, it can be your car, it can be your side of the bed, it can be a place in the backyard or the front yard. You should have a personal space, a space that you can go to. It has the items that you need to support your well-being. We all need our own space. We all need something to just rejuvenate us and generate just some calmness if we can. Find that space and make sure it has what you need to support your well-being. A relationship with nature is very important. I know right now it's beautiful here in the great state of Minnesota. Get outside, enjoy as much of the sun as you can, because pretty soon it's going to be really cold and our friend snow will be back with us. And for some people, they enjoy the snow. So that's their relationship with nature. But for many of us, we don't. And then global environmental health. So we have to pay attention to global health. What's happening around the world? Are there new illnesses and viruses popping up? Some people may have heard of monkeypox and we got freaked out all over again. We have to pay attention to what's happening globally all the time now. I mean, we should just do that as a regular checkup. Like what's happening? What's the weather today? What's happening around the world? Those are gonna be like just new things. Not for paranoia, but just so we're informed and up to date. Health. I'm not gonna spend too much time here. You already know that you need to have a balanced diet. You need to be having at least 30 minutes of physical activity. You need to be getting at least 7 to 8 hours of sleep. It used to be 8 hours, but they reduced it to 6.5. I say 7. You need to make sure that your thoughts and emotions are in good space. So you're taking care of that emotional health. But the big thing here that I want to highlight is your stress mastery. You have to be able to figure out how to master your stress. Too many of us are stressed out all the time. We're so stressed out, we don't even realize we're stressed out because it's a baseline for many of us. You have to master your stress. Your stress connects to so many different other things within your body, your physical health and your emotional health. And some people even say your spiritual health. You have to make sure that you are controlling your stress. You might not be able to control the things that stress you out, but your response to those things is what's important. Relationships. I'm going to show a diagram here shortly. It's going to talk about the different types of relationships you can have. And you have to be able to make sure that you're managing those relationships so they benefit you. A lot of us do and give so much, and we have relationships that we probably shouldn't have, but we just do it because we feel guilty because of who the other person is, or we want to support this person, but they're really not that healthy for us. So can we relate to them differently? That's something that is a question for many of us. Security. Security is yes, it's about safety, being safe, absolutely. It's also about being able to face our fears and our relationship to money. Now, why would I say that? Right? Why would I say our relationship to money is a part of our security? Well, I don't know if you've ever been broke. I have. I've been broke several times in my life. It is not comfortable. It does not feel good. And guess what? Your mental and emotional health takes a huge toll when you don't have the finances that you need. And with things like inflation happening and gas slowly approaching, $5+ and I mean, some places in Minnesota is already at the $5 mark. It is important that our relationship with money is secure. We live in a society that functions off a dollar, so we have to make sure that our relationship with money is secure. Purpose. You heard in my bio, I'm a big purpose person. Make sure that you can identify at least one life purpose. I think many of us have several, but make sure you can at least identify one life purpose. Purpose gives us direction, guidance, and even sometimes a little bit of boundaries on where we are going and what we're doing. It keeps us, quote unquote, in the game. And it's important for us to identify that. If you haven't, I would encourage you to go on Amazon, go to a bookstore, go to a library, and just any books on purpose. You should be able to, it should be able to help guide you kind of figure that out for yourself. Sometimes people utilize spirituality for purpose. That's not everyone's answer, but it is for some people. So definitely tapping into your religious resources is also helpful. And then lastly, community well-being is important. What community environments are you putting yourself in? How are you connecting to other people? As human beings, belonging is a huge nature or a huge part of our nature. And if we don't have good belonging, ultimately what ends up happening is we end up feeling isolated and alone. And that's somewhere that we do not want to be. All right, so shifting from self-care to sustainable wellness. We've already started talking a little bit about doing this. I'm going to dive in a little bit more. So one of the reasons why I talk about making this shift is because of how a lot of us are introduced to self-care. We're introduced to self-care as a measure for when things don't go right. So it's a very reactionary practice. So you have a bad day at work, or two students are fighting, or a coworker says something to you that you don't like, and then you're encouraged to do what? Meditate, get some extra steps in on your for your Fitbit, go drink your fancy special tea, like do some yoga poses and stretches. Like you're asked to do all these reactionary things to when things don't go right. And what I'm saying is let's flip it a little bit. Instead of waiting till things don't go right, do it before anything even happens. Be proactive with your self-care, and that's one of the ways to be sustainable. Because if you're building up that habit to take care of yourself before things go awry, that's when you're able to deal with those things a lot better. And guess what? We are human. Stuff's going to happen. We are going to still have responses to things. So when we do have those responses show up, we're better prepared for them. But two, they're not hitting us as this huge, monumental thing that we have to overcome. So being sustainable is being proactive in our self-care. You want to make sure that you have a sense of support with your sustainability. So who are those people around you? You want to make sure that you have meaning and purpose in your sustainability. Why are you doing the things that you're doing? Does this even make sense for you? And then ultimately, you want to make sure there's a level of effectiveness. Does this actually work for me? Is this effective? Sometimes we get into doing things and it becomes habitual, but it doesn't have the same effect, right? So you may be doing 10-minute, breathing exercise or meditation. And then if you've done that for a few months, those 10 minutes don't feel the same. So maybe you need to bump it up to 15, or maybe you need to try something else, etc. So you're always evolving and making sure that what you're doing is effective for where you're at on your journey. So here are some things that we can do to make sure that we continue to be healthy. So we can have those individual activities, physical activities, spiritual activities, mindfulness, meditation, humor, which is one that doesn't get talked about a lot about, but being able to laugh is very therapeutic. And I would encourage you to find whatever you find funny to indulge in that as one of your individual proactive self-care activities, your sustainable activities. Making sure that you're doing things with close connections. Now that we have a lot less restrictions for COVID, people are getting together, people are getting outside. It's great. So making sure you have some exploration. So you're trying new things, you're spending some quality time, things are fun, you're sharing, you're engaging. My meaningful supports at work, being a part of this summit is one of those things, right? So being able to get these good learning opportunities, being able to have ongoing assessments, supervision if that's a possibility, team building if you can do that. Team building doesn't always have to be sanctioned by the organization or the school or the group. Sometimes you can just say, hey, let's get together, let's go bowling after work or something of that nature. Sometimes you may say, let's go to happy hour, things of that nature where you're engaging with the people you work with because you spend a lot of time with these folks every day. And then we have support in the field. So sometimes we have the meaningful supports, but sometimes you may need someone who's in a different district, someone who has a different position within education, someone who may be just doing just professional development. You may not know this person. They may be an influencer, or they may be someone that you can consult with. Making sure you find support and make sure that you're checking in, that you can do the work that you want to do, that you're still invested in this work is important for your sustainability. Then there's these principles. I'm gonna go through them really quickly for the sake of time. We have, balancing your work and leisure time. It's very important. Prioritize the way in which you spend your time. Do not let other people waste your time. Control interruptions, which is very hard in today's world where we have all these digital devices. They give us notifications all the time. But when it's time for you to take care of yourself, can you put those things on do not disturb? Can you hush those things so you can gather your own thoughts and you can be attentive to your own needs at the moment? Allow time for thinking and the unexpected. Delegate work whenever appropriate. Be assertive. Learn to say no, both to unnecessary work and to taking on other people's tasks. Put past mistakes behind you. Don't dwell on them. And then review significant problems and learn to manage them better and make realistic action plans. So many people don't take the time to really think things out. Action plans are a good thing. You can Google action plan templates, and there's tons of them out there. Just figure out, okay, what do I need to do to get to this place in my life? How do I map this out for myself? And then just work the plan. When we're able to work the plan consistently, that's when you start to see those results. All right, I mentioned this earlier, circles of support. This is important because we are relational beings, and it's important to understand how do we relate to people. You don't have to relate to everyone the same. So level one, we have our circle of intimacy. These are close, this circle is made up of people that we love, people who we feel safe with, who we're vulnerable with. It includes very close family members and very close friends. These are the people that you tell the real truth about how work was today. So when people say, how was work today? Or how are you doing today? This is when you don't have to filter through and you're able to just tell them exactly what you think, how you think, unedited, raw, and uncut. So that's your circle of intimacy. Then you have your circle of friends. They get the filtered version. This is the first filter. All right. So circle of friends. This circle includes people who are good friends, people who have coffee with or tea with. You go out to dinner with them. You spend some social time engaging with them. So these are people you trust, people that you consider friends. You actually make an attempt to spend time with them, etc. Then you have another outer ring, which is your circle of participation. So these folks are the circle that comprises of acquaintances from many different areas of your lives, school, work, church, social clubs, etc. These are, there's an opportunity for these people to move into friendship and intimacy circles over time. So they can move in, but for the most part, they have a certain function. So that's the person you see every Saturday for golf. That's the person that you see, at work, and you have that special joke that you tell one another. You talk about the game and how the Packers beat the Vikings yet again, etc. That's those folks. Then there's that fourth ring, which is the circle of exchange. This circle includes those who are paid to be in your lives: doctors, teachers, social workers, case managers, providers, massage therapists, all that stuff. Well, that can be interesting if you're Deshaun Watson. That's a whole other thing. But these relationships are purely transactional. These are people who have an exchange. So your nail technician and your eyebrow person, these are those people who are there, you share some information with, but you have a lot of filters because you really don't know them that well, but they're cool enough to let in just a little bit. We can relate to people differently as we go. And sometimes people can find themselves at different levels, different zones, depending on how the relationships develop over time. And now I want to talk about post-traumatic growth to close up the next couple of minutes. Before I take any questions, I want to remind people, put your questions in the Q&A feature if you have them, so that I can identify that there are questions. I see some folks in the chat. I don't know if there's questions there, but I will grab them at the end. So where do we go from here? So for folks who really have struggled during the pandemic or even prior to the pandemic, and that trauma-informed care piece really just showed up in their lives, where do we go from here as far as getting better, feeling better, etc.? And I want to introduce to you, if you haven't heard of PTG or post-traumatic growth. Post-traumatic growth is a positive psychological change experience as a result of adversity and other challenges in order to rise to a higher level of functioning. This is what's important. Functionality, how we actually respond to the things that happen. Ultimately, post-traumatic growth highlights the benefits of emotional growth, stronger relationship bonds, and different perspectives on life. There are 5 domains to post-traumatic growth that we're going to go through really quick. Personal strength is number 1. So trauma often leads to self-doubt. You don't have to doubt yourself, but when you are going through trauma, you have a lot of self-doubt. A lot of people blame themselves. Second, recognizing your ability to handle challenges is important for your personal strength. Increase your sense of capacity to survive and prevail. And then lastly, you must believe in your own possibilities. So a lot of times we don't believe that we can do things, especially when we've been traumatized or stuff has been overwhelming for us. Our own abilities become, we get into that self-doubt mode and we don't believe in our own abilities and they become minimized. But it's important to understand that you do have personal strength to move beyond. Next is healthy relationships. We just kind of talked about that circle of support. So this is just routing that out. We need to be able to find supports and networks to help you move forward. And again, those people can find themselves in one of those 4 circles of support. They don't have to be in all 4. They can just be in one of those areas. Setting strong boundaries and letting your expectations be known is very important. Now, people always say, you need to get boundaries, you need to get boundaries. But no one ever defines what the heck boundaries are. What are they? So here's a quick, easy definition for boundaries. Boundaries are the expectation that you have for people to treat you and the expectation you have to treat yourself. And when you're able to articulate those expectations, those are the boundaries. So you're able to tell somebody, hey, this is what makes me feel safe, comfortable, friendly, and free. And these are things that you should be doing. And this is how I expect to, I treat myself this way, etc. Those are boundaries. And then being afraid of being vulnerable may be a big obstacle to developing healthy relationships. When you've been hurt, being vulnerable is a very, very scary place to be in. But sometimes in order to build that intimate relationship, you have to get a little bit vulnerable with people. You don't have to let them into everything, expose yourself, but you do have to get a little bit vulnerable to a place where it could be uncomfortable, but it may be what you need to build that strong bond with another person. Have an appreciation and purpose of life. So understanding what is important to you and what are the things you value and why do you value those things. Do things that lead to a purpose and then celebrate small victories. In Midwestern culture, Minnesota nice culture, we are very modest at celebrating things for ourselves. This is a big challenge for us. It is okay to pat yourself on the back and say, you know what, I did a good job here, or I really executed that. I did that well. It's not being cocky or overconfident or self-indulgent. Well, a little bit of self-indulgence, but it is for you to say, you know what, I can do this. It's that affirmation you need for yourself to keep moving forward, and you should do it. You should not feel any shame by doing it either. And then next, this is number 4, consecutive constructive choices. Try to say that 4 times in a row. So don't be afraid of new experiences. Explore new information, spaces, and people. In this changing global environment, I kind of started this off talking. You have to understand how culture is shifting and changing. If you are resistant to this, you are going to find yourself in some extremely uncomfortable situations on the years to come. If you haven't already done so, you have to be able to explore new information, new spaces, and new people, because as big as this world is, technology is making it a lot smaller. And you're going to see new types of kids, new types of information, new types of experiences, and you have to be prepared to make those adjustments to the best of your ability. Exposure and consistency are key. So being consistent and trying new things are 2 key things. Have some compassion for yourself. You're not going to do everything well. When you make mistakes, it's okay. Do not beat yourself up. And then lastly, professional development is important. So don't be afraid to finding out who you truly are, who you want to be. What are you investing in yourself, right? What are you investing in yourself to be better, to make sure that you are sustainable in your well-being? Is it time? Is it money? Is it just dedicating a space for yourself? What are you investing for your own well-being? And then lastly, are you keeping it real with yourself? Or as the young people say, are you keeping it 100 with yourself? If you're not keeping it real, if you're not being authentic to who you are and how you are going to really struggle with taking the best care of yourself, with sustaining your well-being and health. Even with your self-care, you're going to struggle because you're not being authentic. Being authentic is like a vessel or a window of opportunity for you to be well. And it's important for us to do that because so many of us are wearing masks and we're walking around and we're looking out of windows instead of looking in mirrors and understanding who we truly are and what we truly need to be healthy. And that's very important. So, post-traumatic growth is the process of post-traumatic growth can lead to improved relationships with others, more compassion, openness, appreciation for life, spiritual growth, personal strength, and a renewed sense of possibilities in the world. Resiliency. We all have the ability to be resilient. So resiliency is the quality that can help you recover from early life experiences and develop and deep emotional wounds. The ability to bounce back or adapt in the face of adversity and major life stress. And everyone has the ability to be resilient or to become even more resilient. Please remember that healing is a journey and not a destination. You will reach destinations on your journey, but you have to keep going. And sometimes on that journey, that road is going to have potholes. As we know here in Minnesota, you have potholes all over the place. Sometimes that road's going to have construction. As we know here in Minnesota, there's construction everywhere. But you got to keep going. You got to keep going on your journey. And with that, I'm going to pause and answer some questions. If you don't have questions now, you're still formulating them, feel free to send them to my personal email there on the screen to the left. If you want to connect with me, you can use the QR code to connect with me via LinkedIn. We have a few minutes left. Let's see. I'm gonna look through the chat before I look through the Q&A to see if I didn't miss any questions here. Hopefully there's not a black box blocking things.
Brandon, I think the chat didn't have any questions specific to you, but the Q&A does have a question.
Perfect. All right. So do you have any classroom strategies for teachers to help students that have experienced trauma? Like no proximity, volume, approach, etc. Like, how do I help reach my students in my classroom? Good question. This is a very hard question for me to answer because I'm not an educator and I don't know all the classroom strategies. But what I would say is for those students who have experienced trauma, it really depends on the type of trauma they've experienced. So for some students, it may be sensory things that they need to help them kind of regulate in classroom settings. So if you have a class, it also depends on the age too. I didn't catch the age of the other students. But if let's say they're elementary or middle school age students, if you have sensory things for them in the classroom and you trust them to utilize those things and not throw them at each other or do anything inappropriate with them, those things can be helpful in classroom settings. So like pipe cleaners, the little squishy balls or things that they do, Play-Doh, things that you can just say, hey, we're gonna do story time, and I want everyone to just take a piece of Play-Doh and just squeeze it in your hand while we're doing story time. Or if they're middle schoolers, you're gonna say, hey, if anybody wants to grab anything out of the box here while we are doing this lesson and while I'm talking and lecturing, feel free to come grab anything in the box. Maybe you walk around and they grab something out of the box as we go, and that's what you're doing. But you're helping them regulate their mood because you don't know what happens when maybe you're watching a movie in class or you're showing a video clip, turn off the light. You don't know what that experience is like for some of those students who may experience trauma. One of the things I want to make sure that's clear is that trauma affects people very differently. And there's really not a good checkbox. And this is what puts teachers in a very awkward position because you can have a class, let's say you have a class of 20 students, and 5 of those students have experienced trauma. Those 5 students could have 5 different experiences with trauma. And you are trying to juggle to figure out what's the best way to respond to the experiences they have, but one of the responses can trigger another student. So it can get very awkward in that way. What I would say is making sure that one, you know a little bit about what the student's gone through or what activates them is going to help. 2, anything with sensory things are going to help just in general help regulate. And then once you have some insight on particular students, engaging them in lessons is important. So because those students may not be good just sitting idle, when you're able to say, hey, can you help me put this on the board? Or can you pass this out for me? Can you give these sheets out? Engage those students so they feel involved can be also helpful. So those are just some quick tips. hopefully that helps. I don't see any other questions, and I think we had time. I don't think we had time yet. We're close to time. Let's see. Anything else in the chat? Okay, I don't see anything else. I appreciate you all. Feel free if you have questions for me later to reach out, connect me either via LinkedIn or email, and I'll get back to you. And I wish you all well on your journey. Yeah.
All right, Brandon, thank you so much. A lot of great messages there. And I think this is very timely for many of us right now to hear these things as we're going into summer and have some time to maybe focus on a few of those things that you talked about. So thank you very much.
Good morning. Thank you for joining us to go into the integrative approach to Tier 1 supports. We want to thank Lindsay Butzer from Laketown Elementary in Waconia and Megan Gruis, who's the Director of Implementation for Character Strong, for being with us this morning. Hopefully you enjoyed Brandon Jones' keynote talk, which was amazing. And now we're going to lead into hearing from an exemplar school who does an integrative approach to PBIS, SEL, and relationship practices. So thank you, Lindsay and Megan, for being here with us today.
Yeah, thank you, Angie. So excited to be here with you all. Welcome. Looks like Lindsay dropped in the chat as you join. Let us know your school and grade levels you work with. I'll do a brief introduction and then we'll get to it. So as Angie said, I'm Megan Gruis, the Director of Implementation at Character Strong. So happy to be coming back and presenting to you all with my history with the Minnesota PBIS project. Just honored to be able to talk through some work that we have been engaged with Laketown on a happenstance, right? Laketown has a special place in my heart. My students, or my kids, they're not my students. I suppose they're students that go, my children that go to or have gone to Laketown Elementary, and been fortunate to help them along the way as the school kicked off. They're super young, 6 years young, and had the privilege of working there for that first year, and then continue to support Lindsay and the team to integrate all good things into PBIS. So can't wait to have Lindsay share her story, and my lens will just be from really that implementation support. What do we need to get right? How do we get a recipe to this work right? So we can leverage PBIS and then add on things as we know. It'll become more and more apparent that there's more things that we add onto the plate, but how do we do it really strategically and well and use data to do that? So Lindsay, turn it over to you.
I'm Lindsay Butzer, and I've spent the last 5 years at Laketown Elementary, a PBIS school. And before that, I also did work in a school for 8 years. So that was PBIS as well. And so PBIS is my favorite, and I love it as a school counselor. I think it's just really a holistic. And so I'm excited. I don't always love presenting, but I feel like it's important to share with each other, because that's how I've gained all of the stuff we've done, is by going to sessions where I hear from schools and what they're doing, and you just pick and choose and take things that work for you. So I'm excited to share what works for us in an integrated approach, and how we've just kind of navigated the last really challenging couple of years and kept PBIS at the front so we can kind of survive it better and thrive through it, and not just feel stressed in survival mode, kind of thrive.
Yeah. I love how you said thrive, because you are thriving, and all of you that are joining us today are going to see exactly how that has been happening. So we're going to start quick just with really intention, starting intentionally by first engaging relationally. So I'm going to pull up, this is just some an activity in the Character Strong curriculum. They always start with relational activities, but we're going to do one today just to get things rolling. I'm going to do full screen here. Lindsay, would you pick one of these get to know you games?
My favorite with kids is always a would you rather. They love those.
All right. Yes, good choice. Okay, Lindsay, you go first. You pick a number. Once you pick a number, we're gonna do the would you rather.
Let's go with 3, and then people will type in the chat what they would rather, right?
Yeah. So
Okay.
1 or 2 in the chat. Would you rather know the history of every object you touch, or be able to talk to animals? I'm gonna put you on the spot, Lindsay. What is it that you would like?
I dropped a chat with talk with animals, which I'm seeing is very common in the chat. Most people are saying talk to animals.
Wouldn't that be insightful? I wonder what they would say.
Yeah.
I'm not a history buff, but I might say number one. Wouldn't that be interesting to just know where everything came from and what its presence is? Anyway, okay, in the chat, who's got the first number? Drop another number that you'd like to play. 1 through 10, 8. Lisa's on it. Here we go. Would you rather have a flying carpet or have a car that can drive underwater? 1 or 2? What do you think, Lindsay?
I think it'd be pretty neat to see what's underwater. So I'd go and try a car underwater. I see a lot of car underwater. A couple ones. Here's another one.
After the last couple weeks I've had, I think I'd like to have a flying carpet because maybe I could get places on time. It's like a substitute for a private pilot's license, right? A flying carpet. Could it take that? Awesome. All right, let's do one more. Another number in the chat. We've done 3 and 8. Who's got another one? Oh, Angie put 1. Or maybe that was an answer to the question.
That was her answer.
That was her answer. All right. Anybody have another number they want? 5.
5.
Thanks, Jessica. 5. All right. Would you rather have super speed or be able to fly? It's kind of similar to the last one. 2, fly.
Yeah. Lots of people want to fly. I think that would be helpful to get to and from places.
Think about all the time.
Chelsea said super speed. We got 1 super speed.
Maybe if super speed was faster than flying, that would be pretty efficient. I don't know. Awesome. Well, thanks for that. Always fun to do a few of these games. This little bit of insight and fun before we get going, and really a good way to model how do we get learners into the space and engaging with each other is by just opening it up and being intentional first. So today our goal is to start intentionally. We're going to talk about some common language for really the integrated work. We're going to dig into a tier 1 recipe for how Lake Town has approached integration, and we're going to give lots of examples. Lindsay's got amazing examples of how integration has been brought to life at Lake Town, and then we will take a moment to really exit intentionally and ground ourselves before you take off for the next session. So here we go. First part is really just definitions, everybody getting on the same page. We know to have clarity, we all have to have common definitions and get going in the right direction. So here's what we're going to do is talk through what is integration, what does tier 1 mean, what does it mean to look at holistic children. So integration, here's how we're defining that today. Really the act or process of putting together different things, coordinating, blending, functioning as one whole. That's what we mean by integration. We think about what has integrated over time, in the chat, say whether or not, did you have a phone, like a bag phone that was in your car, one of those car bag phones? I don't even know what those are called, but that was really cool. We had these phones that we could talk to. I had a big red cell phone, and that was amazing at the time. And then we think about, well, then there was this BlackBerry thing and everybody had to have a BlackBerry, and that seems so long ago. And then we talked about, oh, there's apps. We can actually have apps. And then we have cameras. And thinking about the phone just helps us to see, one iteration of something is great. And then as we continue to integrate things, it makes it all the better. So same thing that we want to talk about with really our work in prevention around social, emotional, behavioral support and health in schools. One way to look at it is even combining PBIS and SEL. Those are 2 things that are very common to many schools these days. And what does that mean even if we're trying to integrate SEL and PBIS? We like to look at PBIS as really combing the environment from the outside. So it's that outside in approach. We're establishing safe, predictable environments from the outside. And then SEL is really from the inside out, helping students to really learn and apply those social emotional skills. And that leads to a more comprehensive approach to the work. Another way to look at this is looking at data. So it's important to say, well, what does the research say about really integrating different practices? So on this screen right here, you'll see that this was based off of screening measures. So social emotional screening measures, pre and post. How students did on those screening measures. So we have SEL only in a system that only had SEL implementation. In that middle column, you're going to see PBIS only. Then we've got the combination. And then we also have business as usual, school systems that had screening measures that didn't have any specific program or practice in place. So you can see here that there's great results when we look at externalizing and internalizing. But when we put both together, the reductions in those students that were flagged on screeners really have a huge impact when we are looking at both SEL and PBIS. So the importance there, really the importance here, same thing. On a tool that assesses sense of belonging with a high of 9, there were students that at the beginning just with SEL, delivering SEL curriculum at a 3, but when we look at SEL and a very structured relationship practice, that goes up. So integration really provides a lot more of a holistic approach. It gives kids extra doses of what they need and really helps to provide that climate and culture and ultimately get us the student outcomes that we're looking for. So if we go baseline, common language, right? Going back to that common language, what is Tier 1 really supposed to do? It prevents difficulties. When we think about Tier 1, it's all about what every adult is doing every day to help students engage and be as most productive and successful in their environments. Tier 1 is what all kids get every day, in and out, by all educators in a building. We want to really enhance their success and get that solid foundation so that if or when a student needs more intensive intervention, we can guarantee that Tier 1 it's been done. And how do we do that? Well, we really have to do this work with fidelity. We got to pick really good evidence-based practices like PBIS, like an evidence-based social emotional learning curriculum, like an evidence-based relationship strategy. And we do that really well. And then we can kind of check the boxes. Are we implementing things with fidelity? And if so, then we can kind of layer in. But Tier 1 is really about what we're doing for all kids all the time. So in the chat, Tier 1 holistic needs. What do we think about that? What that means? Let's talk that through in the chat. What does it mean by holistic needs at Tier 1? What do kids need to be whole? Think about whole children. We don't ever really teach half children. They're whole people coming to spaces. So what do they need at Tier 1? We know they need a solid environment, safe, predictable environment like PBIS.
Safety and
Strategies.
belonging.
Yeah.
Routines. Looks like safety came in there twice, and then sense of belonging and sticking with routines.
Yeah. Yeah, we've got students that have a backpack of needs, don't they? Holistic needs. Oh,
one more.
All right, one more. A for accountability. Holistic needs really is about, are we addressing the whole child? We know that children have physical needs when they come to school. They have academic needs, social emotional needs, and they have behavioral needs. So think through in that little backpack of what kids come to school with, how are we strategically addressing all of those things on the screen? We know PBIS has such fantastic results for students feeling safe, feeling supported, really being in predictable and consistent environments. Then we think about what else needs to be layered in. How do we build those children from the inside out? We hold them to high standards academically, make sure their academic needs are met, make sure their physical needs are met. We've seen that more now than ever. Are kids safe when they come to school? Have they had breakfast? We know that the saying about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And we think about, we've got to be really intentional about how to integrate this work and do that well. So integration, Tier 1 integration really means the intentional work of integrating high fidelity practices, right? So we've got to do things really well. We can't just piecemeal and think like, oh, we got 5 out of the 10 things that we're doing. It's the intentional integration and high fidelity. Are adults doing what they're set out to do of social, emotional, behavioral, and academic supports that every student receives daily and consistently so they can be well, they can belong, and they can really engage fully in their learning experiences. So that hopefully all of our outcomes are, we are teaching and supporting students to be life ready. That's our ultimate goal. So when we look at integrating, it's how do we pick what exactly to do well? And then what supports do we put in place to do those things really well? So we like to take this recipe approach The work that we do at Character Strong is called customized implementation supports. This is kind of the work that that we do, is help school districts get to these outcomes. How do we look at all this stuff that is on our plates and dial it back and say, what do we get? How do we get to outcomes? What outcomes actually do we want? What do you mean by an outcome? We got a strategic plan. Yeah, you do have a strategic plan. Now, how are we putting supports in place to make that plan come to life? Sometimes strategic plans are really big, beautiful goals. And to be motivated as teachers, we need more proximal goals. What's happening really in the near future to change internally with students? Then when we think about intermediate goals, what's happening to change students' behavioral outcomes? And then we get to those distal outcomes that are often very clearly mapped out in districts. So we think about outcomes or what we want to achieve or what we want to happen as a result of what we do. And then we look at this as a recipe approach. We got to develop guidelines and strategies about how we combine different experiences for students that get to a specific outcome of interest. So Lindsay, tell me, if you have a recipe for a chocolate chip cookie, what do you expect the outcome to be?
Very tasty cookies.
Yeah, exactly. Very tasty chocolate chip cookies. If I gave you flour, could you get a chocolate chip cookie?
No.
That probably would be a different experience, wouldn't it? A really dry. Kids would not be happy, and probably neither would you. Like, oh, I don't have a sweet treat. I have some dry flour, right? So we think about that recipe is we need all of the ingredients in order to get what we want to get. So we combine things to get our outcome of interest. One specific program or practice isn't going to provide us with that outcome. We've got to integrate things and do them really well over time. So Laketown has kind of developed their tier 1 recipe for social, emotional, and behavioral support. Their outcomes are well-being, belonging, and engagement. You see those over there on the right. If we want to have students with well-being, belonging, and engagement in school, they've predicted that these 4 ingredients need to happen daily and consistently at the tier 1 level, meaning all staff members have the knowledge and the awareness and the mindsets and the skills to deliver these things to students as they interface with students. So on that tier 1 recipe wheel on the left, you'll see environment, empowerment, relationships, and teaching and learning of social emotional learning. So we're going to dig in to each of these ingredients, and Lindsay's going to share how they've made this happen. And we can literally tell you they have made this happen because of the data. And the survey says, what talk show or what game show is that from? Probably many.
And this is just one particular survey. We do like the TFI and the SAS and all of the different PBIS surveys, but the survey that this is referencing here with some of our outcome data is an annual parent and student survey. So it's 4th and 5th grade students who've taken this when it references the student outcomes, and it's not showing up though, Megan.
Yeah.
There we go. So when we give this survey, you know, we're always like, what's going to come back? But we've had overwhelming great numbers this year of parents feeling like we're really supporting their students. We're a welcoming environment, which was hard because with COVID, it's hard to invite parents, and our number had gone way down last year in welcoming environment. And it went back up this year because we were able to get them back in the building. For me, it's super important to see that 98% of our students in our building, 4th and 5th graders, are saying they have at least one adult they feel comfortable with. And that is, we have a district-wide belong team that works on sense of belonging as well. And just to see 96% of students feel that sense of belonging is important to us, and that kids have friends. And then I'm really proud that our staff, I love working where I work because we do feel supported, and we're part of a successful team where we help each other, we make mistakes and we talk about them, we laugh about them, and we try again. And so being able to share today some of the things we're doing is exciting because our survey is showing that I think it's working.
This is amazingly compelling data points, Lindsay. It's just phenomenal. Even thinking through just context in the kind of backside of COVID, that you have 100% of staff that feel supported by one another and that they're part of a successful team. It helps them to feel efficacious. We need staff that feel like they can deliver things well, that they have a supportive climate, that there's psychological safety, as you mentioned, for people to fail and fail forward. And we don't abandon implementation efforts because there's a struggle. And then clearly you can see your student and parent results. They feel it, they know it. So let's get into how you make that happen.
Go ahead. So,
Okay, let's dig into environment. We know environment's all about PBIS. You're using PBIS, safe, predictable, proactive, inclusive. We really don't want the opposite.
So just connecting to what Megan just said about, when things get hard, a lot of times you want to abandon or say, what can we give up? And make room for, the COVID protocols. But I think what our building said in the very beginning of COVID is PBIS is going to lead us through COVID. And so we kept that at the forefront. And that was like all of the environment was just embedded with COVID procedures. And so it was right through our teaching of the matrix. The school-wide matrix was adapted then to fit some of that COVID procedures, and all of it was taught through those, teaching rotations. A lot of it we had to, do through presentations versus going to the environment. But some of the successes we have with our environment, I think really engaging were visuals for kids. We're in an elementary school, but I think even older kids like the visuals. It's that common language is our fun pride guy. It's not just all the words, because the kids probably walk past all the words of the matrix, but they see the little pride logo. So for us, it's putting lots of visuals. You can see our pride letters there being filled with award tickets, so kids can see their progress, like measuring how they're doing. And so if we're going to be measuring that, we want them to work on a certain pride letter. They can see, are we showing inclusive behavior? So the environment, we make it really fun for kids. And then I think a big success for us with the environment is that we're a few years into now where the people who are in the environments, the adults, like our custodian there and our recess supervisors and lunch supervisors, are really empowered to teach the kids the expectations. They come through rotations and you can see them there. Those are from teaching rotations, that the kids would hear the expectation from the adult they're being held accountable with. So that has helped us a lot with the kids showing more respect to those adults. And so I feel like that's something we really found helpful, is allowing those staff to feel empowered. And with that comes, they need time. And so our recess supervisors came to me at the end of the year this year, and they said, are we going to get time during workshop week again to, hourly rate to be able to make sure we make new posters and plan out teaching? And we have some new ideas of how we're going to break up the recess rotation and have, even within the rotation, they're going to go to the field, the playground, the blacktop, so they can very specifically deliver the expectations for those even on the playground, not just one presentation. So it feels like the environment really has that consistent routine taught by the people who hold those kids accountable.
I'm going to share a quick personal story. I have the absolute privilege of helping to organize some adults to do the last day of the year. It's called Pride Spirit Day at Lake Town. And it obviously just happened on the last day of school. And students transition out of the setting. So they're in two different zones doing lots of fun carnival, just games and really community building activities. And they transition out, what was it, every 50 minutes maybe? So we had to blow the whistle to have them transition and go find their teacher, because it's kind of a free for all. It's amazing. Kids just go and they play, and then we blow the whistle when they need to go to the next spot or when their time is done. And I blew a whistle. And the kids didn't move at all. And then I blew it a couple more times and nobody went. I thought, oh, this is really weird. My son comes up to me, he goes, Mom, you need to do dun, 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 dun. I was like, what? And so he goes, no, when we're out here at recess in this environment, in this context, the whistle needs to blow in that pattern. And then we line up. Predictability and consistency. So I blew the whistle, and what do you know? Immediately they all came and they found their teacher. So it just speaks to how that generalization is not just happening. The recess supervisors have done an amazing job teaching, but now it's happening in different contexts, which really means that it has been internalized and generalized in various settings. So that story just brought me so much joy to be like, oh, look. And my third grade son taught me a little something that day. So let's move on to empowerment. And what does empowerment mean? And really how Lake Town has capitalized on student voice and bringing them into the work. So unfortunately, we have to be honest that roughly half, 52% of 6th to 12th graders say they enjoy coming to school most of the time. which is not a statistic that I think any of us want to see. We know that disengaged students leads to classroom management challenges, which then leads to educator burnout. And then research shows us that when students are given choice, they experience an increase in intrinsic motivation. So effort, performance, and learning grow. That's really powerful information. When we are given choice as adults, and when we give choice to students, our effort, performance, and our learning grows. So 3 keys we want to consider when we're looking at empowering students. How are we offering voice and choice? What are we doing to support the with them approach versus the to them approach? And what are the opportunities to really develop agency and sense of hope?
So I really like that phrase that Megan just said about with them and not for them. It's been super fun to include students in our Lake Town Pride, but we do talk about our expectations all the time. And it's just fun to hear when there's a new student joining and kids will help explain Pride to other kids. And it's just when the kids feel that sense of it's with me, then they just take it on. And so here's some examples of how I feel like I've observed the empowerment with kids. And I'll focus first on our 5th graders. So we have a couple different ways our 5th graders are empowered to be a part of our PBIS work. We have ambassadors, which is a small group of 5th graders who apply to become like a leader. And over the last 5 years, their applications, I would say like 99% of the kids will use it. They are not told they have to put Pride into their presentation, but they all put Pride in and talk about how over the years of their Lake Town experience, they have used Pride to guide their friendships, their learning. And it's really fun to see all of the tailored presentations. And so one of the students that went through this last year said, you know, while we're waiting in line for lunch, it would be nice to have a joke to read, something to just kind of keep us busy and distracted so we're not bugging each other. And I was like, I love it. So we put lunchline laughs by 5th grade ambassadors, and each morning they would have to come and write the joke of the day. And then the answer wouldn't get posted until lunch, because when they're walking to music and gym, they would see the answer. So we wanted to wait. So one of our lunch supervisors helped kind of take that on with the 5th grade ambassadors and posting that. And kids loved it. And it was an example of a student-led idea. And then they took it on, and sometimes it had to do with Pride too. So it was fun to see other things that I just noticed that we don't tell teachers you have to include Pride in integrating it into your math, science, language arts. But I see it all the time in our daily work with teachers embedding it. In 5th grade, an example was the kids had to give either Pride tickets or majors or minors to the book characters. And so they had to think through, well, is this a big enough behavior that it would go to the principal? Or is it smaller and it's just a reteach? Or is it Pride behavior and they get a Pride ticket? Another example you'll see there is the haikus in 3rd grade, is the kids each got to pick one of the 5 expectations and write a haiku about it. And then they posted them and they used our school colors. So it just shows that in integrated empowerment, that it takes time to get there. And it's what has helped, I think, to build that empowerment is not to say you have to do this, teachers, is a sharing opportunities where you do showcases as staff of like, what are you guys doing? What are you doing? And getting time to share ideas, because people are like, oh, I love that. And the other one with the whiteboard that's really messy is what is your Pride New Year's resolution? So kids did this. The teacher came in and the kids had put this on the board, and then all the kids wrote. And then I didn't put the picture of it, but there's another, which Pride behavior are you going to focus on better, like to be better for your resolution? And so the kids all tallied, and then they talked about it as a class, what they had picked. So it's just when kids feel it and live it every day, it just becomes part of what they do. And then it's fun. 2 other ways that we really empower with students is that top one there is the Move Mindfully, is an initiative we've been working with the company Move Mindfully to get some mindfulness cards and brain breaks for students. And here you'll see the card deck is a breathe, move, rest kind of flow. It's a 3-part break. And so each of the kids standing up there in the front are leading one of the cards. So for teachers that maybe weren't feeling comfortable, they're like, I'm going to let kids lead it. And it was amazing for kids to see other kids leading it versus, again, that we are doing it to you as adults. And then the last way we give a lot of empowerment is student voting. So kids get to help, set a goal. We're going to fill this fish tank, and when it's filled, what should we do? Not we're going to have a PJ day. We vote on it. So we've done like voting in the lunchroom with our 5th grade ambassadors. We've done Google voting with COVID procedures, having it back in the classrooms. This one over here that says April challenge with our pause. The 3rd graders did this for a trimester grade level incentive. So they all voted they wanted a hat day, walk in the woods, and extra recess. And then as they filled up their pause, they would get those incentives. And the kids chose those, not the adults. So just really giving kids those opportunities. Another example of voting was we have a family movie night each year outside of the school day. And so to get more kids to come, we, in our 5th grade ambassadors, picked top 2 movies. And then they went into the classrooms and the kids got to vote which was the top movie for movie night. So then all the kids would know what movie won that they would be going to see. So just really trying to include kids into anything that has to do with pride. We're like, how can we get kids involved? So that really helps them feel empowered, and it's fun to see what they do. I mean, they surprise me. The kids come up with better ideas than the adults sometimes.
That's awesome. Lindsay, if you were talking to a school and they hadn't ever developed a student committee or really got the student voice in the work, what would you say is maybe 1 or 2, like, do this first? What's those first pieces that you need to do? Because this is obviously really well developed over the last 5 years. So what would you give as a piece of advice if you were just trying to start?
Ooh, it's hard to choose because I like all of these things. So it's hard to say, but finding some teachers who are really passionate about it and can maybe even just do a pilot. Sometimes we take on way too much as educators and we try to go all out school-wide craziness. And sometimes it's okay to say, let's try this in 1 grade level and see how it works. Or is there one teacher who can test this out for us, see if it's sustainable for us to then scale out for the whole school. And don't be afraid to like try something and it doesn't work. Our 5th graders, like for an example, we don't feel like it's fair that only a small group gets to do a lot of this pride work. So we're trying something new next year called the Laketown Pride Crew. And we have no idea what it's going to look like, but every single 5th grader is going to be on the Laketown Pride Crew and assigned to a specific classroom. So it's more of a mentorship. And we're going to try that this year and see how it goes so that we're not leaving out a good chunk of the class. We had almost, I think it was close to 50 kids want to be ambassadors, and we could only take on 12. And we're like, this is ridiculous. We just need to figure out how they can all be a part of it, but do something small and find teachers who can maybe try it out if you're not ready for school-wide. That would be my advice.
Love that. Thank you. Such great examples, Lindsay. The 3rd piece, relationships, that 3rd ingredient to that recipe. There's some statistics out there, which positively, we know educators, 98% of them believe that relationships are an essential ingredient to success. Essential. 98% of educators say we have to have strong relationships with students. The downside of that is that the less than 40% of educators really have common language and dedicated practices they use to intentionally maintain healthy relationships with all students. So it's really exciting that over the last few years, Laketown has adopted the Establish, Maintain, Restore strategy for relationship building. So Lindsay's going to talk about how they've brought a very strategic plan to life.
Yeah. And I think this is a hard one to do because it is, how do you keep track of relationships with kids and make sure you have positive relationships other than like that data from, the parent and student survey. It is hard. And we do know as educators, we all are here for the relationships. And that was my master's work, was around why do some kids that have traumatic experiences come through it in a resilient way? And I know that was sort of the work of the resilience work this morning too, is the highest effect was around a positive adult relationship. And so it's so important in a school where we have these kids all day. So what we've tried the last couple of years to be more intentional is we've done some professional development around a data tracking system or program. It's kind of more of a framework called Establish, Maintain, Restore. And it's practices you can use. And it also has what I'm really excited about this next year is we're going to be doing some equity levers right within the playbook, it's called. And it has very easy to use specific ways that you can track relationships, build relationships, and then make sure you're doing it with that equity, inclusion, diversity lens too. So we're like I said before, small. So year one, we were like, let's make the spreadsheets and just do establish, maintain, restore, track that with our pride tickets, because we were already tracking our pride tickets. So what you're looking at in that spreadsheet is a 5th grade example of the spreadsheet that we made, where teachers would go in. We did it once a month and they would track, am I in establish? Am I still getting to know this student? Am I in maintain? I'm feeling like I'm hitting that 5-to-1 with them. I'm really able to, you know, redirect them on something and then get them back quickly. I understand who they are. I could say a few things about them. Or am I in restore? I've had quite a few, you know, times that I've had to give the student feedback and, you know, it's just not going well. And then they can see there too, what were the pride tickets? That was year one. Year two, then we added in our screeners data. We put in our sabers scores against that to see, okay, what are they at for the social, emotional, academic behavior screeners for that the teachers are taking. So we were able to add a little bit more data. And then we also added in our majors and minors. So then teachers could see that kind of whole child. We also included our specialist team and our special ed. So we've tried it a couple of different ways. And again, to see what is best, what's more beneficial. Is it if specialists spread out and they're working in different grade levels, which we found benefit in, because if a student is in restore with the homeroom teacher, but in gym, they're rocking it and they're in maintain, the gym teacher could give some great input. What we found is that it just wasn't always enough time. And so this next year, instead of doing it monthly or every 6 weeks, we're going to scale back and do it 3 times a year with a longer amount of time to be more intentional. And then we're going to have our special ed team wants their own spreadsheet as well, to be able to talk as a team, a special ed team, where are we at with our kids? One other celebration that I really like this year with our establish, maintain, restore is one of the meetings, the specialist team and I sat separate from the grade level teachers. And we went through every grade level. It didn't take long. It sounds like it would, but we did every student in restore, kindergarten through 5th grade. And the team of us said, I'll take this one, I'll take this one. And our goal was in that next month was to catch them either with a pride ticket, or we have these postcards that we can mail home. So each student that was in restore, we were able to say, I'll take that one, I'll take that one. And we wrote their names down to make sure in the next month we would at least catch those kids that were in restore or hadn't had a pride ticket in that past data period that we had gathered data. So it's a lot. It sounds like a lot of spreadsheets and work, but what I did notice at staff meetings when I sat with teams is the conversations around, okay, we're all kind of struggling with this one student. How are we going to support them? Who has some ideas? What's worked? What hasn't worked? And it's building that capacity for teachers to feel safe to say, I am struggling with this kid. And that can be hard to do. And you don't maybe want to do that as a team. And so maybe it was a little intimidating at first. And so maybe these spreadsheets, if you don't think their teams would be able to team it well, is maybe they do it on their own first. So we did do it by teacher, but then they would look at the whole grade when they teamed. The other thing on here is that morning check-in. If you can see that Google form, our 5th grade teachers use that each day, and they can customize, obviously in the Google form, what they're asking kids. And so that one, it says here, do your students do the Google form check-in every morning? Yes, they, so our 5th grade team is really blessed with, like, they have, I think it's like 10 minutes in the morning with kids, and then they go off to specials. So they do have that. I know that when do you read them? If you take your kids and you have them all through, you're going to have a really hard time reading them. So they're very lucky that they have the kids 10 minutes and they go to specialists and they read through them. So during their prep time. So I could see it being hard. Maybe if they can't, they could do more of an exit. How was your day? Like reflecting, and then they'd be able to look at it after school. But the 5th grade teachers have said it is just amazing for some of those internalizing kids that just maybe wouldn't raise their hand or share. You know, my turtle died over the weekend and they're devastated, but they would never raise their hand and share it. And just being able to get that context for the rest of the day can really prevent behaviors from what the 5th grade teachers have shared. So that was a lot of information, but I do feel like that establish, maintain, restore is really, it's been really helpful. And we're going to continue to adapt it each year.
Hi, Jamie. By the way, Jamie just dropped a question on about EMR. It's a program. You can actually probably just Google EMR. If I'll find the link to the EMR playbook, all the spreadsheets, the tracking. Lindsay and her team obviously developed this more robust spreadsheet, but there's examples in the EMR playbook, totally free.
Yep.
So we'll drop it here in a second. Looking for any other questions about it. Sarah, yeah, either EMR in a secondary setting, how does it work? You can use EMR you can honestly do it really with a lens of, are there students that I already know? Is there a specific class at the high school setting that I'm struggling with? Or students that I know I don't know as well, so you're just really intentional about establishing relationships with them. There's definitely different versions. Like a key piece of it is the collaboration in that PLC or staff meeting, however you make that work, is going through the playbook and the strategies and having those conversations to make sure that, especially in the secondary setting, you're able to really hit and talk about all students. So ideally, yeah, you'd be able to do it all. We know that that's probably not the case. So pick a classroom and start there. And then once you feel as though you've got those students really in a strong maintain, you can move on to a different hour or classroom, or have it be advisory, etc. So definitely ways to adapt it. And I'll drop the playbook in there so you can get some more ideas.
Yeah, and the other thing with the secondary setting too is our secondary setting is already doing some relational tracking, and I can't remember what they call them, something webs. Maybe that's the middle school, but they're doing something like that. And then they were like, oh, that sounds like a little bit easier. And so they were thinking about maybe taking a look at the EMR strategy. And I'm not sure what the 150 kids mean. Is that like the whole?
I think she means by if you have 150 students that you see throughout the day, how do you do that with all 150?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it does go fairly quick when you're going through to, check off where you are with students, and maybe you do it less times throughout the year. Maybe you do it around conferences time. Like right before conferences is when we found it to be more helpful too, because then it's like, oh, I'm still established with this student, and it's, 8 weeks in and we have conferences. So that maybe you just do it twice a year, not so many times too. Question says, do you provide a way for students to also give feedback at times? Maybe I think maintaining, but a specific student feels like they're in restore. That's a really great question. I've actually thought about that. Like, what do we do when there is, as the counselor, like that ends up sometimes being my role of like students telling me they're all stressed out, but the teacher is like, I don't see them stressed out in class, or they're just avoiding their work. And maybe there is that like, relational dynamic. So I'd be curious to see what that looks like on how you would ask students, like maybe that would be in the 5th grade,
form,
Google form, but we have not specifically done that, but great question. Yeah, we have not used My Savers. Someone put in there My Savers where students could give scores. We have had discussions around that, and we're actually going to be doing a district-wide SEL/screeners district kind of like committee that's going to be looking at, is this what the one we want? Do we want a different one? So like a curriculum review with what we would use for a screener. And we've never used it, but I'm curious to hear what other schools, we're going to learn about that this year.
Cool. Yeah, and you have other opportunities for students to give feedback as well, like your 4th and 5th graders when they completed the student survey, but being very mindful to, again, lead into that. How we feel one way as adults, how do our students feel? Last ingredient that we get to talk about here in your Tier 1 recipe, Lindsay, is really the teaching and learning of SEL. And SEL, as we know, what is it? It's the process by how all young people and adults, we need to make sure we know that adults are included in this, that we acquire and apply knowledge, skills, and attitudes in order to develop healthy identities, manage our emotions, achieve our personal and collective goals, feel and show empathy for others, establish and maintain relationships, and make responsible and caring decisions. That's straight from CASEL. As many of you are probably very familiar with the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning. If you don't know about CASEL, please Google it. But there's their definition. They kind of hold the high standard around SEL work. their definition of SEL. So Lindsay, tell us how you've brought to life the teaching and learning of SEL.
So our school uses the second step curriculum, and we do have a set pacing calendar and dedicated time for teachers to teach it. We are still struggling with enough time, but we have some time. We know we surveyed our teachers and they would like even more professional development and more time dedicated for it, because it can sometimes still get pushed aside when there are bigger initiatives and things going on. So I feel like if you're not even doing any SEL and that's the first thing you want to take on, is you might have to start really small and give it a little bit of time and keep growing. And then as teachers see the benefit, they ask for more time. So that's where we're at right now, is teachers want more time. They want more tools, which is why we picked up Move Mindfully to integrate and add to our second step. So it's they go together. Move Mindfully is not like its own SEL. It's more of a mindfulness practices within our second step. So the pacing calendar is created by our Pride team. And the first couple weeks of school would be our Pride teaching around PBIS and the expectations. And then it gets into our second step curriculum. And then we've added in resources because teachers keep saying they want more. And again, like I said, we're going to be looking at a district review process. Is this the right curriculum? Is this what we're going to stick with? We like it, but we also wonder, are there higher research-based curriculums? So we do have that where all teachers are teaching it. And then this other side of it is that the other staff that don't teach it directly. So even myself, I'm not directly teaching it. Special ed isn't, the recess supervisors are not. This next year, we're going to be more intentional about the people who indirectly teach it and giving them that common language, just like we do with peaceful, respectful, inclusive, determined, and engaged. They're going to get the common language. We have the lanyard from second step that has like the problem solving skills, the calm down steps, but do they really know all of the components around it? And so we're going to do some more intentional work with all staff so that everyone's using the common language, because like Megan's little slide, data, how it went up even higher when you mix your SEL, your EMR, and your PBIS, that's really, we're wanting to keep that momentum going. Someone asked about the slides. I'm not sure. We'll figure that out at the end. The other thing we do to support our second step in Pride is each Tuesday, the principal and myself host a Talk Tuesday, and we guarantee they're 2 minutes or less. And we just focus on something that maybe it's not necessarily in the minors or majors data, or maybe it is, or we're just hearing it from some staff to talk about, walking more peacefully, throwing away our paper towels. And then we also bring students on, typically our ambassadors, to help host the show, and from a kid's perspective, and that empowerment piece, again, integrating it with our SEL, where they're hearing it from kids and how they problem solve and how they wake up in the morning when they're tired and not late for school. I think that was what that episode was about. And so it's not always just adults talking to them. They're hearing it from kids who are like, yeah, I have sports and I'm tired too. And here's what I do to make sure in the morning I get up on time. So kids are hearing it in a lot of different dynamic ways. And just always that boosting up the SEL more than we've ever done before, because of where kids are at and our needs are so high. I think we saw, I don't remember the percentage, but quite a few more kids with mental health, behavioral needs. And so just any opportunity we could get in front of them to say more about our second step and Pride, we are taking those opportunities. We also have a WIN schedule that's fairly new too, and dedicating some time for reteach. And that's still in growth. I'm just checking the chat for questions.
Yeah, we got a question here about the beautiful Google Calendar pacing chart.
Sure.
If you'd be willing to share a copy of it.
Yes. Where do we share? Do we drop them in the chat? I'll make sure it's a make your own copy.
Yeah.
I can link it. We have access to the presentation afterwards. I can link it right here in the presentation.
Yeah, and if that's okay, then we can just submit another, we'll submit another slide deck that has it linked. That'd be awesome.
Yeah.
I
think the biggest thing with this one is that as soon as teachers, I know where teachers are always at, like something more, something new. No, there's no time. This is the one thing teachers have said now that we've been doing it for 5-6 years. They're like, the second grade teachers are like, wow, the incoming first graders have so many skills. Like their skills in second step are so advanced, we can move more quickly now. We want the pacing calendar to go faster so we can get to problem solving before May. Like we got to bump it back because the kids come in each year with more skills. So if you're going to pick one thing to start, I do think like a really great SEL where all teachers are delivering it. It takes some momentum, but when they see those successes and then next year's class coming in with better skills, they can get to the academics quicker. It really makes a big difference.
I think that just one huge thing to keep in mind is the mindset shift of tier 1 SEL. We would never think about not teaching math or not teaching reading or not teaching our content areas. But we need to think about how we have this mindset of not teaching social emotional behavioral support. So how do we get in, really start with the why behind SEL work, the large statistics out there nationwide. I was going to say nationally, it came out funny, nationally. And then what is it saying? What are our students saying? Do we have any survey results? And then really getting that compelling why behind why it needs to be delivered at tier 1 by all teachers, and going from having it being delivered by a counselor maybe once or twice a month for 30 minutes in and out, and then it kind of lives and the counselor comes and talks to us about how to breathe, or the counselor comes in and does this too. No, it's now integrated. Everybody knows the language. We understand how it relates to our pride behavior expectations, how they're complementary of one another, and that is a shift, but that's where to start. Obviously, if we're talking about trying to implement something new and getting our people ready, we got to start with that compelling why, and encourage those of you that haven't done this work yet to do that. And if you want some resources around kind of the why behind SEL, we can send along some slide decks for sure. Any other questions that you see, Lindsay, on this one?
There was one about could a third grader kind of be the leader in a pre-K 3 school? And, maybe the second half of the year, they're doing different things like, reading a book to the class. One of the things we do, we'll do like a school-wide book, like a SEL book. We're going to be doing some around sense of belonging and diversity, inclusion next year, and empathy. And maybe it's like a school-wide book, and the third graders can vote to sign up to read the book in a younger kid's classroom. And it doesn't have to be large scale, but that was kind of my idea, is I think my son just finished third grade, and I think he'd be capable of doing some leadership, but not to the level of a fifth grader. But he would love to read a book, I think, in a younger class. I think that always makes kids feel really empowered. And if the book is around a topic around PBIS or SEL, why not? Bonus. They're a leader and you're double dosing them on some topics. That was my one thought.
Awesome. All right, so Lindsay, I know that you don't do all of this on your own. And we know that there is no successful implementation without effective teaming. So I'm going to put up a graphic, and Lindsay's going to speak to how she's really taken her PBIS implementation team and turned it more into an integrated implementation team. But just as a reminder, or maybe this is the first time you've seen something of the like, but when we're talking about implementing anything, whether it's curriculum, academic curriculum, social emotional curriculum, PBIS, what is our team responsible for? We really have to portray what are the shared priorities and commitment. Things that we prioritize get time and they get resources. So what is it that we're giving our time and resources to deliver the work? Then we need to provide adults time to collaborate, to plan, to really dig into the work and create ongoing professional learning experiences. We know that we're really good at doing one-time trainings and never coming back to it. So that needs to then be owned in an implementation leadership team. Then that team provides reminders and cues. You can see that all over Lindsay's examples of how they're reminding and cueing adults to continue to do the work. And then we need to acknowledge staff, recognize them for really starting to implement anything, any new initiative to help keep them going and keep them motivated, just like we do with our students. Then we got to get feedback. Obviously, you saw at the start of this presentation, we need data to show the why behind the work, and then we need our own data to say, are we doing what we said to do to change student outcomes? And from that student survey, you can tell those student outcomes and the student self-report have really grown over time. And then we problem solve. Lindsay alluded to this many times. We fail forward. there are hurdles in the work. I like to describe them as barriers and hurdles. Barriers are things we actually can't get through. We have to course correct. We got to go the other way, actually. And then hurdles are something that we just need help getting over. We need to collectively come together around a problem, and we need to strategize, and maybe we just need to get lifted over that hurdle together. But ultimately, there is a solution behind the work instead of abandoning that implementation effort. And we need adults to be well, to have psychologically safe environments, and really the ability to help them feel as though they're delivering work that is meaningful and that they can see their role in change of students and student outcomes. So Lynn, tell us a little bit about how you've restructured your PBIS team to make this work happen.
Yeah, so definitely I know that feeling. Some coaches say at the coaches meetings, you know, like, how do you get it all done? How do you do all this? I'm like, oh, I have a great team. Like sometimes I'm like, I don't even know what's going on. I need to go check in with somebody, because we do have a really large team. And this next year, actually, I asked someone to co-coach with me, and I'm super excited. Our Spanish teacher and I are going to be co-coaches just to keep the work going forward. Because I think when we sat down to plan the staff workshop, I was like, this is a lot. Like, how do I teach integrated work? How do I do PD and help my staff, like new staff, understand the integrated work? It's really, that's like my new challenge. I don't know. That's our hurdle. We're trying to figure out that hurdle. The integrated work isn't a standalone presentation. And so it's really hard to teach my staff that are going to be new. So that's our big hurdle to overcome right now. But we have representation from all grade levels, special ed, specialists. We have a support staff. I'm really, really lucky. We have great, strong admin, and that really does give us the time, because time is always what I hear from people. There's just not enough time. We meet about twice a month for about 45 minutes. And then we've been very, very, very lucky. We get one full retreat day a year. So we already have the pacing calendar for next year. We have kind of our year-long plan for this coming year with incentives. What are we going to do with our minors? Because we want to overhaul that a little bit. So that is a big hurdle for many schools, is that you don't even get that time. And when do you get it done? Because I know I get it. If we didn't have that day, I would feel so stressed out. And so I empathize with you if you're like, I don't have anything ready for next year, because I know like we're really lucky that we get that. So if there's ways, I'm always looking for grants and opportunities to pay ourselves and figure out how to do that. That's a whole nother topic we can talk about too at some point if people have questions, but just trying to get your admin to really understand that time. And when they do, and that they see that, all of this kind of comes along with it. And then people are feeling really empowered in my team, and will take things on, and they'll just, okay, I'm on incentives and here's the plan for the year. And the team looks at it, gives some feedback. That looks great. Or they have concerns and we make changes. So that is one thing I would say about our team, is that people are really willing to share when there's a concern and openly talk about, I don't know if that's going to work. Like, tell me how we can get through this, to kind of build that well-being within our team too. And I saw a question there about suggestions for high school. I don't know what kind of like specifically with EMR or what it was about, but if you're not doing anything with like a leadership group, I think the question popped up when we were talking about leadership. I would say is just getting feedback from kids first to see what do kids want to see improved in your school. And then that will sort of drive what could kids do to be involved, maybe like do a focus group, like start pulling some kids and getting ideas. Like if we could have a more of a sense of belonging at our school, what would that look like? What would it feel like? And get some insight from kids before you start implementing programs, maybe, so that kids are involved.
Yeah, and we often get that question about high school SEL, and the world does get a little bit tight when it comes to high school SEL curriculums. You can certainly look on the Castle site. Character Strong, that's how they started, was middle school and high school SEL, lots of digital curriculum there. So that's a place for you to look as well. They would be another resource for you. So I'm going to exit us intentionally. We'll keep answering questions in the chat if you have them about teaming, really about relationships, about environment, about empowerment, the teaching and learning of SEL. Drop them in. Lindsay or myself would be happy to answer them for you. If you have other questions really about how does it look to integrate this work, please feel free to reach out. But in the chat, if you can, or just on the Post-it note right next to you, Maybe you're a handwriter, whatever it is. What are 2 things that you learned today? And 1 commitment that you have as you leave this space. So think through, there was a lot of information that was shared really about how do we look at tier 1 work, use the integrative lens, figure out what our outcomes are, and then find really specific good practices to make those outcomes come to life. And that's true integration to meet the needs of the whole child. So 2 things you learned and 1 commitment that you have as you leave this space. Think that through. And if you're brave, drop it in the chat. Hi, Kate. Love the way data was used. Absolutely. Tells such an amazing story. Commitment to check in with students, make sure no child was missed.
Yeah,
definitely. Process of implementation. Yeah, absolutely.
mm-hmm.
Cool. Using your team, rockstar team you have, Lindsay. Start small. Don't be afraid to fail.
Seriously. Yeah.
Yeah. Commitment to research more about AMR. Awesome.
Teachers
Allison.
showcasing. Yeah, that opens it up to feel safe.
Oh, Connie's going to commit to start a 5th grade leadership group. That's fantastic. I'll pull up our emails again. Lindsay, I'm sure wouldn't mind an email about how to do that and do it well.
Yeah, if there was something specific, I might not get to today because it is sunny out. So it might be within a week, but I will definitely email if there was something specific. You're like, can you tell me how you did this or what did it look like? I am happy. That is how I got where I got after this many years of 13 years of PBIS is hearing from other people. So definitely willing to share. Yeah, don't worry about going too fast. It's okay to do one thing well rather than 40 things not well. I agree.
Absolutely. So I love that commitment, John. I love it. Absolutely. Feel free to reach out to either of us. We'd be happy to connect with you on how to make this work come to life in your building. Totally appreciate the time and everybody's engagement in the chat.
Thank you, Megan and Lindsay, for that engaging presentation. What an awesome example with real life takeaways that attendees can use right away. So thank you both for your time, and thank you to all the participants for engaging in chat and asking questions and